The best way to listen to the best of the week is on the Relevant Radio app. Free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.
Now, let me ask you a question. Are you a parent of a new or a young teenager, or maybe even a soon-to-be a teen?
Yes.
There you go. All right. More from you, Sarah, momentarily here. Or do you have a teen at home? I can tell you firsthand with now a 17-year-old son. He is definitely a teenager, that parenting teens is different than younger kids. They're not little kids anymore, and he reminds me all the time, but they're not quite full-grown men or full-grown adults either. Some parents are a little afraid, a little nervous, or even anxious about their kids going through this stage of their life. Moms and dads, no need to be afraid. Joining us live this morning from New Hampshire is Morning Air contributor Danielle Bean to share some survival tips for parents of teens. She's also the author of several books and a retreat leader and a popular speaker on a variety of subjects related to Catholic family life. And Danielle has been married to her husband Dan for nearly 30 years, and together they have 8 children. So she's speaking from experience. Good morning, Danielle. Thanks so much for joining us once again. It is great to be with you.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. I got a question. Is it true that teenagers can develop a little, what we call attitude as they go through their teen years?
No, they develop a big attitude.
Okay.
It's definitely true. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is part of it. Like, part of our culture really builds up this idea of a teenager. I know I was terrified going into those years of parenting. I had no idea what I was doing, but the culture had kind of set me up to dread it, to think it was going to be terrible. And yes, there were moments where it felt like that. We need each other, and we need to be honest about, yes, the challenges. And I think we do a pretty good job of sharing about those. But we also need to be honest about the joys of this stage of parenthood. It's really a beautiful thing. Your kids are growing up in the world. They're becoming more fully the people that God intends for them to be. They're learning new things, meeting new people, trying new experiences. And, out in the world, sometimes more than you've ever anticipated them being. And it's challenging for both of you, but it's also a beautiful time of just being an encourager and a supporter as your children grow up more fully to become the men and women that God wants them to be.
So if they do display any of this big attitude, as you call it, it's kind of natural, part of this stage of development.
Absolutely. It's absolutely part of the process. And something I found really helpful when I was kind of going through this as a parent was to remember when I was on the other side of it and when I was a teenager and how misunderstood I felt, how emotional I felt a lot of the times, a lot of the stressors I was going through that my parents didn't know anything about because I wasn't sharing it with them. And so keeping that in mind, no, you don't know the full story about what your teen is dealing with. And so it's really important to recognize that this is a natural stage of development. But of course, that doesn't mean you don't set some boundaries and you don't demand proper respect and behavior in your home.
So when your teen says, "But Dad, you just don't understand," we need to listen.
That's so true. And I think, sometimes it's absolutely true. We do not understand. So I think it's important to ask some questions and not just the, generic, how is your day at school? Fine, blah, and that's it. Or don't just ask questions dealing with the schedule, like what time do I need to pick you up? What time will you be home? And that sort of thing. Ask questions about what's going on in their life and be open to hearing them speak about these things, whether it's their friendships or their schoolwork or things that might be stressing them that you don't know anything about. Be open to hearing about them.
Sometimes it could be like pulling teeth when they're teenagers. You ask a question, yes. Oh, how was baseball practice? Good.
It's true. So sometimes you got to get a little bit creative with the ways that you ask questions. Say, like, what was the best part of your day? Or who would you say is your closest friend right now? What do you like about him and spending time with him? Or, being a little bit more specific with your questions. They might still try to get away with the one-word answers, but it's going to get harder to do if you're a little bit creative.
Danielle, do you find that if you're active, doing something physical or doing an activity with them and then just bringing those questions in then instead of just like you're in the car and how was your day, that's like a dead end. That just never goes anywhere. If you're doing something interactive, maybe one-on-one, does that bring about better results?
No, I think so. I would say be open to trying things like that. If you're going through a hard time with communication with your team, setting up a project like that, maybe you're going to go and do a volunteer opportunity, or maybe there's something a little bit fun that they might like to do that, maybe you haven't done it together in a long time. Make it happen. And you're so right that sometimes that takes the pressure off. So if your kid feels like the spotlight's on them and they're being commanded to perform for the parent figure, they're not going to like that and they're not going to respond to that. But if you're taking them out or you're spending some deliberate time with them, just focused on them, letting them know you enjoy spending time with them and you care about them and their life, then you're more likely to get them to open up a little bit.
Well, Danielle, let me tell you, my 17-year-old is this big baseball player. He's known as the baseball guy on campus in his high school. And so I make time for him. I take him to the batting cages. I even feed him the balls in the batting machines and hit him ground balls. And we have so much fun together doing that. It really brings us together. It's a father-son bonding thing. Even though he's a big boy now, he's as big as a major leaguer. We're doing the same thing we did when he was just a little tiny guy when he was 7, 8 years old.
Oh, I love that. That is so beautiful. And that's such a simple example. It doesn't take a ton of effort, but it's being present to the things that they truly care about and being active in their lives in those small ways that really adds up to beautiful time spent together. I remember when some of my older kids were teens and I was new to this, I was reflecting on the fact that you can't pick the time that they're going to ask a question, that they're going to open up, but you need to create lots of opportunities for those times. If you're just spending 5 minutes and cramming it in between different things in your schedule, then they're not going to open up during that time. That's on your schedule. But you need to have lots of opportunities where you're connecting and just spending open-ended time together and give them that opportunity to feel comfortable in your presence and begin to open up a little bit. And that doesn't mean everything's going to be a major dramatic heart-to-heart, but all of those moments together really do add up.
What about being a support for our teams? How can we do this even from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah, for sure, parents need to be prayer warriors for their kids. They need to be able to take that for granted, that you are praying for them. You can let them know, but more importantly, be following up and doing it, especially if you're going through a hard time with one of your teenagers. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can say that's going to change a difficult circumstance, but you always can pray, and that is powerful stuff. You can be praying for your teenager. I remember going through difficult things with some of our kids during their teenage years and just praying, Lord, get them through safely to the other side. And what I meant by that was just thinking about when they were little kids and what a precious child this was, and that they weren't that same person anymore. At least they weren't expressing in that same way. And it was really hard to see that, but I knew that person was still inside there, and they were going through something hard. It's important that when our teens are acting out in various ways, it's very painful for us as parents, but we need to remember it's actually painful for them too. When kids are behaving that way, they're miserable and they're going through something hard and may not know all the details of what it is. And so recognizing that it's not something personal that they're, spewing this venom at you, it feels very much like that. And it's hard to not take it personally, but they're going through something hard too. So being that source of encouragement and support for them through prayer is so vitally important.
No doubt about it. My 17-year-old says to me, hey, Dad, just be grateful that I still go to Mass on Sundays. So many of his peers don't even bother to go, especially when I say to him, hey, no shorts. We don't wear shorts for Sunday Mass.
You got to set some of those rules sometimes, right? I think it's really important. And, having those basic standards, but also being flexible about them depending on how your teen is responding. And I love that you're kind of playing that balance there between, yes, it's good, he's going to Mass, so maybe I'm not going to be quite so demanding about his wardrobe, but maybe you are. Maybe it is an important standard that you want to set.
One other thought, we have spent time in front of the Blessed Sacrament before ball games. I can't begin to tell you, how special those moments have been to put it, whatever happens in the game, put it in the Lord's hands. And this is something that I've been able to teach my son, who's, like I said, he's now 17. To this day, it's something that we have tried to do. And it's a beautiful thing when you talk about prayer.
Absolutely. And setting that example for them, I love that you spend time before the Blessed Sacrament, because that's setting this beautiful example of putting things in the Lord's hands. And yes, you enjoy the game, you enjoy baseball, you take it seriously, you'll be upset if you lose, but ultimately giving them that proper perspective. And, speaking of prayer, I think it's really important to remind parents of teens to be praying to your teenager's guardian angels. This is such an important practice because sometimes you're not going to be there. You're not going to be there in the moment when your teen is tempted. You're not going to be there maybe in a moment where your teen makes a bad decision and suffers some consequences as a result of it. You're not going to be there for all the moments that you're worried about, but their guardian angel is. And so praying to them, really making a habit, getting to know them a little bit, spending some time every day praying for your children's guardian angels is really a beautiful and important prayer practice, part of how we can spiritually and emotionally and physically support and protect our children.
I love that tip, Danielle. I can put that into practice right away, for sure. What about respecting their space?
Yeah, well, that's important. So this is something that's going to be different in every parent-child relationship. So that balance between giving them new responsibilities and privileges and also respecting their space. But like you think about cell phones, for example, if some parents will sometimes ask me, at what age can they have a smartphone? And I can't answer that for every parent, for every teen. You need to figure that out with your teenager. I will remind you that is your responsibility as a parent to make that decision. And don't feel peer pressured by the fact that every other kid in your child's classroom has one in their pocket. You need to make the decision that's best for your kid. And I will tell you, we have been all over the map with this with regard to raising our kids. We've tried to delay it as long as possible with most of our kids. And that's what I ultimately tell parents and caution parents with regard to cell phones is delay it as long as you possibly can. They're going to fight you on it. They're not going to like it. But I always remind parents too, if your teenagers are generally pretty happy with your parenting of them, you're probably doing it wrong because you need to be bumping up against them sometimes. You are supposed to be, as their parent, setting boundaries and setting standards that maybe they don't like, setting limitations. So that might mean delaying a cell phone long past when their peers have one. But once they do, it's a delicate balance of navigating. Are you going to have full access to everything that's going on in there? I would say with a young child for sure. And with older children, you need to begin to navigate that. What does that look like? How are they going to learn the responsibility of having this cell phone? How do you teach them about what to do when you mess up? And that, the fact that we have a sacrament for that. So learning all of these things is just this delicate balance that we navigate as parents. And sometimes you need to err on the side of caution and be in their spaces and finding out what they're up to. Other times you need to lay off and give them that freedom a little bit.
Question for you here, Danielle. A caller, Kathy, said one of the key things for her she found was making sure that she was available to talk when her teen approached her and said, I need to talk about something. Even if it was the end of the day, you're exhausted, it's not a good time, making sure that you have time for that. Is that something you would recommend as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And she's very wise to do that because, like I said, you can't pick the moment. And so sometimes it's not going to be convenient for you. This is something you can offer up for their benefit. And be present for them, even if it's late at night, it's after they've been out and you're trying to go to bed. Like, if that's when they're going to open up and talk, that's when you need to be present for them. So very wise from your listener there.
Danielle, a final minute or so, some words of advice for parents, maybe even parents who are about to have a teenager, like our own Sarah. She's just days away.
I would say don't be discouraged and don't be afraid. Like, God made you the parent of this child and he knows what he is doing. You were built for this. You were made for this. Doesn't mean every moment is going to go smoothly or feel great, but it does mean that you have the capacity to do this and to do it well. So lean on God's grace. Be a parent of prayer for yourself, for your family, for your teenager, and for your relationship together. Ultimately, the goal is to help them to grow into the people God wants them to be, and your prayer support is going to be a vital part of that.
Fabulous advice and tips as always. Danielle, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. God bless you.
This entire episode of Morning Air is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay. Download the app today, and thanks for listening.